Grand Portage Resources recently completed the 2018 drill program on its 100% controlled Herbert Gold Discovery property located in the prolific Juneau Belt in southeast Alaska. Drill results are expected through late 2018. Past drill results included numerous multi-ounce gold assays on multiple veins. Grand Portage trading symbols are GPG on the TSX Venture, GPTRF on the OTC QB, and GPB on Frankfurt. For more information, please visit our website, grandportage.com.
You're listening to HowStreet.com radio, available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. Welcome to HowStreet.com radio, the online source for market opinions. Here is Jim Goddard.
My guest is Rick Ackerman, editor of the newsletter Rick's Picks, his website, rickackerman.com. Welcome back to the show, Rick.
Always a pleasure, Jim. Thanks for inviting me on.
Rick, the trade wars between the U.S. and Canada, someone suggested it's now resorted to hostage-taking, with the chief financial officer of Huawei phones being held in Vancouver on the request of the Americans who accuse her of violating U.S. sanctions against Iran. So she's sitting at one of her mansions in Vancouver on $10 million bail. Then President Trump pipes up and says, well, you know, if we can get a trade deal with China, maybe we'll drop the charges against her. Does this mean that the trade wars have now resorted to hostage-taking?
It's all part of the art of the deal, I think, Jim. One man's hostage-taking is another's hardball negotiations. But to give Trump his due, he's kind of reoriented the discussion. You know, on the Wall Street Journal editorial page or the op-ed page, the whole issue of tariffs was just there was only one argument to be made, and of course it goes back to Adam Smith and the doctrine of comparative advantage, where if some country wants to sell things to you underpriced, you take the savings and run with it. You know, you effectively put the savings into producing things where you have the edge. Unfortunately, it doesn't work that way in the real world. You know, if China is glutting the U.S. with steel, for instance, it's not as though capital moves so fluently that we could get into, we could transfer all of those dollars we're saving into the production of, let's say, lithium batteries or something like that. So in a perfect world, Adam Smith winds up being right. You know, let any country that wants to underprice its goods, subsidize them, whatever, let them do that, because you're just saving money that you can apply more. You can invest it with greater efficiency. You know, you can become a better manufacturer, producer of goods and services. But it doesn't happen that way. You know, we've had the directions that capital takes are so skewed simply because interest rates have been low, and it allows a lot of corporate borrowing for next to nothing. So they wind up borrowing money not to expand or to modernize their production plant, but to simply buy up their own shares. But on the other hand, you know, I think Trump has sort of stood on some principles here. Number one, the Chinese have been the most brazen thieves of intellectual property on the face of the earth, and even with respect to the detention and the U.S. Hopes to extradite the Huawei executive, it goes not to anything. It really goes to that company violating the sanctions that Huawei was supposed to honor and observe with respect to trading with Iran. So on the one hand, you're kind of rooting for Trump, and on the other, you're thinking, is he about to tip the whole world into a depression?
And of course, poor Canada caught in the middle, where we're holding the executive at the request of the U.S. China, meanwhile, saying there will be dire consequences for Canada unless that person is released. And perhaps China doesn't realize that our prime minister just can't call up the local jail and say, pop that person.
Well, I'm not quite sure what's going on behind the scenes, whether, you know, Trump is trying to leverage Canada's complicity with some promise perhaps to throttle back the tariffs that were enacted against Chinese steel and aluminum. which, as we were discussing, they're still in effect. But Trump,
and so are the tariffs on Canadian steel and aluminum. Yeah. So is there a threat against Canada behind the scenes? We'll keep those tariffs on until that executive is handed over.
Well, you never know what's going on behind the scenes, but I think you can take Trump at his word when he says, "Hey, I'm a tariff man," and he means that in a way of putting the U.S. in a position where we're playing pretty aggressively with trading partners that have kind of screwed the U.S. over for a long time. And, whether or not the Chinese blink first is still an open question.
Yes. Also, do you feel the president is very aware of who actually pays those tariffs?
He said something that really surprised me. I had to read it a couple of times to see whether I was misunderstanding it. But he seemed to be saying, hey, look at all these revenues that we're getting from the Chinese government, as though the tariff is something that the Chinese pay to have their goods exported. It's like a fee they pay. But of course, we all know that the tariffs are essentially paid for at the port of entry by the company doing the importing. And of course, they pass those charges directly to the consumer, assuming they're able to. But it's going to raise somebody's costs of doing business. And eventually we all pay for it.
Well, exactly. And I was watching a show about Queen Victoria, and the best example perhaps of tariffs hurting your own people is the British farmers wanted to be protected from foreign competition, so the British had high tariffs on imported food. But it boosted food prices, and the poor people were starving in the streets of London because they couldn't afford to buy that imported food. It's your own people who pay tariffs. It's not the country you impose the tariffs on.
Yeah, and it's significant. I would say just watch Walmart and see what they do, because Walmart's a very significant importer of Chinese goods that it sells, and it's not like the U.S. can say, well, we'll just do without for a while, or we'll pay a higher price. You see the direct impact in a major retailer like Walmart. It affects everybody. There's so many people out there who do a lot of their shopping at Walmart that you wind up doing without too many things, really, if you're going to be in the crosshairs of a tariff war.
Yes, and are there any winners when you decide to start trading with counter tariffs?
Not right away, and in theory, the only winner is, I guess everybody wins if the tariff wars are ended and we have just instead of more tariffs, we have fewer tariffs headed in the direction of no tariffs. And if that were true, and we had real, absolutely free global trade, it would benefit everybody.
Yes.
The whole world would feel the wealth effect.
And a good example of tariffs being useless as well, Canada still has import duties on foreign-made clothing, but the Canadian clothing industry, apart from Canada Goose perhaps, and Lululemon, is dead. And Lululemon now has their stuff made in the Philippines or in Bangladesh. So there is no Canadian textile industry to protect, but that hasn't stopped the governments from still imposing duties on imported clothing.
Yeah, and I'm surprised at how the quality of imported clothing has gone up. If you have, let's say, a man's suit manufactured in Vietnam, they've come quite a ways in the production methods they use. The other day I was driving around with a friend of mine. He was thinking about buying a vacation home in Florida, and we stopped at a Steinmat department store because he wanted to buy just some clothing. And the men's suits hanging, at least as they hung on the rack, they look great. The stitching was good and not quite the detail you would find in a more expensive suit, but they look pretty good. And we're talking about suits that were selling for $75. These were cotton with kind of a linen look to them. And I don't know how they're going to do at the dry cleaner and how they're going to hang on an actual person, but they look great on the rack.
So the quality then always was an issue for imported stuff, not so much anymore.
It's less of an issue, in northern Italy, which is for centuries kind of held the exclusive franchise on really high-end leather and silk goods. They were in a quandary because a lot of the smaller craft shops in northern Italy, they'd fallen on hard times. It was very hard to operate as a small business producing super high-end leather and silk goods. And of course, the Chinese were there looking around to kind of to get a handle on the techniques that you use to work with leather and silk, the dyeing processes and things like that. So the Italians were kind of in a quandary because the ways in which these materials are worked are trade secrets that go back centuries and centuries. So there was a I can't remember exactly where the city was, but there was a very significant library of books from the Middle Ages about how you do certain things with leather and silk. And the question was, do we really let the Chinese in the door with a library card? And eventually, as things have evolved, the Chinese have forged more and more partnerships with some of the Italian producers. But it gave you some idea. For a lot of years, we kind of kidded ourselves about, well, it's just the Chinese. They're never going to be quite the artiste that we need to produce really ultra high-end clothing, apparel, and whatnot. But give the Chinese enough time, and they'll master the technique, especially with help from partners who would otherwise be dying.
We'll have more with Rick Ackerman right after this.
Hi, I'm Douglas Mason, President and CEO of Magnum Gold Corp, MGI, and the TSX Venture Exchange. A 2015 drill program on the LH property intersected several high-grade gold intersections, including 11 meters of 20.66 grams per ton gold. Additional drill targets on the LH property have been identified by a 2018 drone airborne magnetic survey to further evaluate a pyrrhotite-enriched gold-bearing system. Please visit our website at magnumgoldcorp.com.
MGX Minerals is revolutionizing the new energy economy with patented lithium extraction technology, replacing traditional solar evaporation using low-cost, low-energy nanofiltration. The first system of this paradigm shift technology is currently being commissioned. MGX Minerals trades on the CSE, symbol XMG, the OTCQB, symbol MGXMF, and Frankfurt, symbol 1MG. For more information, visit our website, mgxminerals.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Rick Ackerman. Rick, the U.S. Fed stopped its quantitative easing. Now the European Central Bank says it's going to stop buying bonds. What kind of an effect do you think that's going to have on the European markets and the markets around the world, considering they're so connected?
We still have one huge rally that's going to come when the Fed announces QE5, I think it would be. I've sort of lost track, but I think we'd be on QE5. And what's happened for months and months and months, we've been fed this story that the Fed had one more tightening left in it. So that tightening was due to come in December. And of course, it comes up against this spectacle of the U.S. stock market, if not falling apart, it's coming down pretty hard. Not so hard that you could say the market has crashed. If you look at a long-term chart, you could even read big-time long-term consolidation into what's happened so far. In other words, it pulled back and we're getting a lot of traders out, a lot of investors in for a new move up. And if there's going to be a reason for that, it will be the announcement that the Fed has shifted officially to a loosening policy. So in this, if there's a transition to be observed here, it's being willfully obscured by the Fed itself with this last statement from Powell that we're just beneath the line where we would have, below which we're at an optimal place relative to that line that separates inflation from stable prices or perhaps even deflation. So nobody knows what Powell is actually saying, and you can deconstruct it 10 ways, but whether the Fed, I guess the meeting is like any day now, right? Is it this Tuesday?
It is coming up, yes.
All right, so So everybody knows that the Fed has been sort of stuck on this commitment to walk the walk by raising rates just one last time. But I don't think anybody thinks there's going to be any Fed rate hikes beyond this because of what's happened. We've got an incipient implosion in the housing sector, the auto sector, and even retail starting to fade here. So the Fed is not going to do any more tightening, and there's an open question as to whether the tightening that's already been done will be sufficient to trigger the U.S. and the rest of the world into recession sometime in 2019. So if the Fed has stopped tightening, and everybody kind of knows it, they're never going to kill the stock market with some stupid announcement that, we're going to tighten a couple more times in 2019. So we're simply right now in a holding pattern, waiting for what I think is the inevitable announcement. Hey, we're going to loosen a little bit.
Do you think they'll just stop hiking interest rates or actually bring them down?
Yeah, and that will either have occurred already to the extent that there will not be a rate hike in December. If that's the case, if they come out of this meeting Tuesday and say they're going to leave prices alone, I don't think they've left room for people to imagine that there will be tightening next year. So by implication, we're already in a de facto loosening mode.
We'll have more with Rick Ackerman right after the break.
I'm Kelly Jennings, CEO of Powerband Solutions. Powerband is a cloud-based provider of auction, inventory, and finance solutions that make buying, selling, and financing vehicles more efficient. Powerband Solutions trades on the TSX Venture Exchange symbol PBX and on the OTCQB symbol PWWPF and on Frankfurt symbol 1ZV. For more information, please visit us at powerbandsolutions.com.
Don't miss out. Stay informed. Receive the HowStreet.com weekly recap with thought-provoking podcasts, radio, and articles delivered to your inbox. Sign up for the HowStreet.com weekly recap on our homepage at HowStreet.com.
Welcome back. We're speaking with Rick Ackerman. Elon Musk has suggested on 60 Minutes that perhaps he might be interested in some or perhaps all of the 5 plants that GM plans to close in Canada and the U.S. As we talked about high production costs for GM vehicles, would that be a good move considering you'd have places that just need to be retooled and trained workforces on the spot?
He's really crazy, isn't he? There's definitely some genius behind the things that he does, but you wonder whether he can pull something like that off. Chevy, just after a long, long period of difficult, never quite success, killed the Chevy Volt. And you get the impression that Musk not only would not have killed it, he may have revived it in some ways technologically that Chevy never thought of. So I wouldn't put anything past him, but he's biting off a pretty big piece there to say, hey, GM, just step aside and let me show you how it's done. And there, as far as how it's done, well, they're producing Teslas in non-permanent structures in California. Anything that puts a roof over the production line, the assembly line, and you could argue, well, this isn't a real company if they're producing cars under tents, but he's still getting it done. They're doing pretty well as far as meeting demand, even though there was a story. There've been lots of stories about Tesla supply falling short of demand, but overall, I guess they've done a pretty good job. And the new sedan looks like it could be a big winner. Other questions about all the competition coming in from every company from Jaguar, Mercedes. It's the hybrid is dead, so that gives Musk a little bit more time and a little bit more edge there. So as far as how investors see it, the Tesla stock has been kind of swimming against the tide here. It's done pretty well, and even though at the last bottom, we've had a major bottom in April and a major bottom in October, and it seems to be in a giant consolidation for a push well above 400, currently trading $373. So investors, whatever trouble Tesla, the company, seems to be in at a time, with Musk getting, they're going to drum him out of the business. He's no longer running the company. Of course, he still is. And they were going to fine him big and fine the company big. But whatever they've thrown at Tesla, it's more than surviving here. And the stock is showing that the perception is that Tesla, that they can take on GM's problems.
Yes, so this isn't so much of betting your money on the company, but betting your money on the person behind it and his innovative ideas.
Yeah, but also there is the company, and they're doing probably the best, the most advanced cutting-edge stuff with respect to battery power. And who knows, Tesla could be the company that produces a breakthrough in power storage that would not just revolutionize the car business, but every business that depends on energy, and it extends into solar. If you can store energy much more efficiently than we're currently doing it, that's the next best thing to being able to cancel out gravity. So you can't discount Musk's ability to deliver on something like that. So whatever reasons you have to short Tesla shares, you better watch out, because the company's capable of doing things that are beyond imagining.
And isn't he testing out those vacuum tube human transporters in Los Angeles now?
Well, that's interesting. That's something we've thought about for a long time. The idea about getting in some sort of pneumatic tube, or it's actually floated in a magnetic field, and you do cross country in who knows how quickly. I don't know. I have trouble leaping into the future with that, really, when I see what a botch air travel has become.
Well, and also you just wonder what happens if the vacuum's broken or something happens with the magnetic field when you're hurtling along at the speed of sound.
Well, I know that even with really nuts and bolts things like roller coasters and elevators, there are technologies that have been perfected to stop them short of disaster. So I'm assuming these tubes where we're hurtling along at, what is the speed? It's thousands of miles an hour, right?
Well, in theory it could be, because you don't have to worry about breaking the speed of sound and shockwaves, because there's no air to form the shockwave.
Yeah, well, I don't know. It's hard to anticipate where things could go wrong. You get into your little, into your kind of subway train vehicle in the pneumatic tube, and anything moving at a couple thousand miles an hour, it doesn't take a big accident to produce a big disaster.
Of course, if this conversation was taking place 100 years ago in 1918, and we would suggest that people would be flying at 30,000 feet at 600 miles an hour, we would have been laughed at.
Right. But, the film Things to Come, it had sort of a visionary look about epic failure in the building of what became Channel eventually. Sometimes in film history, we've imagined the future as a place that doesn't work. I guess probably most notably in the last generation, the film Blade Runner. Blade Runner was kind of a groundbreaker because it saw a dystopia, and I don't know whether it had its effect on the way we envision the future or whether it was the other way around.
Rick, it's always great chatting with you, and we'll chat with you soon.
Indeed, a pleasure. Thanks again for inviting me on, Jim, and I'll look forward to our next conversation.
My guest has been Rick Ackerman, editor of the newsletter Rick's Picks, his website, rickackerman.com. You're listening to HowStreet.com radio. Find us on Twitter at HowStreet, our YouTube channel, Talk Digital Network. Questions for Rick or any of our other guests can be sent to info@HowStreet.com. I'm Jim Goddard. Thanks for listening.
Comments made on HowStreet.com radio are an expression of opinion only and should not be construed in any matter whatsoever as recommendations to buy or sell any financial instrument at any time. Available online at TalkDigitalNetwork.com. HowStreet.com Radio is a production of How Street Media Incorporated.